Hello, welcome to the State of Our World, where we discuss topics of interest around the country and around the world. And today we have a very interesting topic called Not Able to Buy or Sell. It has to do with a verse in Revelation 13. And with me today is, let you introduce yourself and come up with some questions for us.
Sure.
Of course, my name is Alan. And?
Yeah, my name is Todd, and I'm a businessman here in the area, and so good to be back again for a very important topic, a topic that we are told in Revelation to be ready for a certain event. And so, it's specifically, and maybe we should, do you want to start out by, do you want to go to the text, or should we?
You can hit that too, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to read the whole text. It says, and this is in Revelation 13, starting with verse 16. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name.
We'll get to that later, some of the details on that. So let's find out about money and how much control it might have in the world today. You got your first question was?
Yeah, so here's the first question I have, Alan. So the question is, what kinds of fears are used to have people give up their freedoms? Let me restate it again. What kinds of fears are used to get people to give up their freedoms?
Yeah, and last time we talked a little bit about this too, and it is interesting that if you want to get people to give up rights and freedoms, you have to scare them. And recently we talked about climate change.
Yep. How
climate change is a big issue today, so that people will give up some of their freedoms, like using automobiles with gasoline and so forth. Another thing was the COVID-19. Remember, they even talked about the Great Reset could take place because of COVID-19. Reset meaning reset world finances and control and governments around the world coming together. They also use war. We hear a lot about Ukraine, and we hear about war. And if there was a threat of attack on the United States, you can bet people will say, okay, take any rights you need, we want to be safe. And then money in the economy too. If the economy started to go bust like it did in 1929, you can bet that people are going to change their attitudes about their personal freedoms. In fact, at that time, they made some wrong decisions in the country, controlling the money. And you remember what happened then. We'll get into, maybe discuss that a little bit later too, but it was terrible for the country. So we want to live without that fear. So that's another thing they use to try to control.
So I think about just recently, through the COVID crisis, how freedoms were exchanged for safety, and even those fears, were given way to, in some cases, mandatory vaccinations. And I think where that struck a chord is people were in careers where their employer, through a mandate through the federal government, depending on what sector you were in, had to go through the vaccination process, or you'd lose your job.
Yeah. And churches were closed down, and there were a number of things that happened during that time. A lot of small businesses were closed, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. You could spread them out all over town in these small businesses, or push them all together in one big store where
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of the smaller businesses were, had to close, and some of the larger businesses, I won't name names, got to stay open. So what was behind that?
Who knows? But we know the government does have power over our finances.
So that brings me to the next question.
Yes.
So how much money, or how much does money control our politics?
Money controlled politics. Well, we do have some laws, but they are working around those laws sometimes, like vote buying. That's illegal. However, let me define vote buying first. I have it written here.
Okay.
It says it occurs when a political party or candidate distributes money or resources to a voter in an upcoming election with the expectation that the voter votes for the actor handing out the money or the rewards. And you think about that, and a lot of people, they're influenced by, well, will my welfare be cut? Because sometimes you hear that, they say, oh, there's a danger that everybody over the age of 67 years old is in danger of not receiving all of their Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, and all of these things could be affected, like, if you shut down the government,
right?
Because you couldn't come to an agreement on the budget. So,
in fact, we're kind of facing that right now, aren't we?
So this practice is there where people will say, hey, if you vote for me, I will make sure that you get even more money than you're getting now. And it's illegal to bribe people to vote, but yet it's done that way. It's kind of a borderline issue.
So peace and safety is what rings through my head right now from what you just said. People are willing, to extend certain votes in a certain direction for peace and safety.
Security. Yes. And another one that comes to mind is there are all kinds of earmarks in Congress.
Yeah.
So senators will say, okay, I want to push this thing, and I'll attach it to some legislation so that my state gets this amount of money, millions and millions of dollars for some program or research, and then they use that for campaigning and say, look what I did for the state, so you need to re-elect me. And that's almost like buying votes, but not quite.
Yes, and when we're faced, maybe to bring the current events in of a government shutdown, looming government shutdown, you will see in the omnibus spending bill all those carve-outs that have nothing to do with running the government.
Right.
And that is what you're just talking about, and it really goes along party lines to carve out extra projects that get thrown into the spending bill.
And it has a control over voting too, and to a degree, where people say, hey, if we vote for this person or keep this person in office, we'll get more money.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so is that the same as an earmark? Is that what we're really talking about?
Yeah, earmarked funds, yes. That is so common. And they have discussed doing away with earmarking funds or giving the president the right to just cut certain things off and say, I'm going to vote, I'll pass this, but not that. But it really, we're back to the old system where we have a lot of earmarked bills coming through, money coming through, legislation. And so, it does affect that person running for office again. So in a sense, it's like buying votes.
Okay, so I brought up the COVID crisis here a little bit, and through that process, there were cash payments that were made to families and individuals that qualified. And automatically there would be money that would be sent based on your tax return and in the previous year, and those payments would be automatically appear into your direct deposit account.
That should scare you, right?
Yes, it should scare you. And most people, I think here is the problem, is people that live on a budget suddenly receive cash that they weren't expecting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's supposed to be stimulus cash,
Mm-hmm.
right? So people usually go out and they spend it on things that they probably wouldn't have bought before. What the government is expecting is that people will spend the money and it should boost the economy. The problem is the government doesn't generate funds or money. They can only have the authority to tax. But I want to tie this in to my next question.
Let me go back to that. The biggest problem they had with that was that there was a slowdown in production because of the virus.
Yes.
So, and at the ports coming into the country. And so now you have all this money and the products are limited, so the price goes up on everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's inflation.
And which is where we're at today. So the expectation, and coming back to votes, as you're saying, you're probably more likely to vote for somebody because that person provided extra income that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Now, as we start to transition into, I mentioned that the cash just kind of shows up in your bank account. You didn't receive a physical check. Maybe some did, but most people actually received a electronic transfer. And this reminds me of the steps towards a cashless society.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So as we're taking steps when funds are we already are living in the day and age when you send money to this vendor through a credit card or that vendor, and the government is sending cash out, and you buy things, and there's, lots of money being transferred without it being in physical form.
Right.
Why is that a problem?
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages to a cashless society, but you're talking about government getting into accounts and so forth. I recently heard in the news where the government wanted to be informed if anyone received more than $600 or spent out more than $600. And I don't think they got away with that, but they're trying to control people's personal bank accounts. The advantages of a cashless society, little study on that. When you're traveling and you have exchange of currency, especially going to another country, and you have to carry, if you have to carry 1,000 $100 bills,
Right.
that's a problem.
Right.
So when you're traveling, it's very nice to just be able to use credit. You don't want to carry a bunch of bills with you, and part of the reason for that is robbery.
Mm-hmm.
So they're afraid somebody's going to stop them on the street, pull a gun out, rob them of everything they have, including taking their credit cards. Mm-hmm. Then how do I even get home? There's a little concern about, even with passing money around, change, bills. When they were going through this COVID problem, they thought, everybody's handling this same money and then counting it, putting their fingers in their mouth or touching their mouth after they've handled all this money, and they're concerned about disease. So the advantage of having a cashless society is they say, well, it's safer as far as disease is concerned.
Okay.
And another reason they thought it was pretty good is to block the underground economy. Now, an underground economy is
what does that mean?
Where people are just being paid with cash.
Mm-hmm.
There's no record of it, so they don't have to pay income tax on this money that's changing hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great point.
they say that a lot of people do this. You know, they're paid like out in the fields, they're working and stuff, and they just get paid cash. And a lot of these guys that have vending, you know, a little trailer that goes around selling food and so forth, they just are paid in cash. I remember a lady came. She says, "I want to help your program here you have for the community," and so she gave about $2,000 in cash. That's the kind of business she had. And there are a lot of people saying, you know, this is big.
Yeah.
Up to $2.6 trillion.
That's a big number I have no comprehension of.
It's underground economy, people exchanging cash, and it doesn't get registered so that they have to pay taxes on it. So the government's quite interested in that. Then the disadvantages also of having this cashless digital economy would be identity theft. You know what's going on all the time. People are stealing your identity and then trying to clear out your bank account, you know. People feel that if I have cash in my pocket, at least I have something that nobody can steal over the internet. And they feel like it could compromise personal information. You know, you got this digital, and you have to give out a lot of information so that you can make these transactions, and they don't feel good about giving out that information.
To be able to identify that you truly are the person that you are, right?
Right. And they don't like government surveillance, which could happen with digital currency. And there are poor people or people that live way out in the country that don't use a computer. They don't have access to this digital economy. And so right now they say, well, what are these people going to do? And so those are disadvantages. And so for some people it's just too complicated. You get people that are up in years, way up there, and it's just too complicated to try to go online and do this digital payment. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're used to writing a check or going down to an office and paying cash. So those are the disadvantages. And I doubt if they'll get to a totally digital economy anytime soon.
So I have kids, Alan, and you used to be able, you had to balance your checkbook, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to select off the checks and the deposits, and that is really kind of a lost art these days. And remember how you would, tirelessly look for that penny or that quarter, that you were off in the checks and balances. My opinion is that a lot of the younger people aren't doing that, and they're trusting in the bank or the system to make sure that all the transactions are secure and authentic.
Yeah.
But you can remember how many times that there were mistakes made, honest mistakes sometimes. So if this is a digital currency and you really need the cash or to be able to spend it, the question is, how do you access that in a digital economy when you actually need it?
Somebody else could control it.
Yes.
And yes, that's what we've been talking about. Government control, or could somebody come in and control and take our money or stop us from spending or buying?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't get any money, you're not going to buy. So it also makes me think that a lot of people using credit cards only, digital, they run into deep debt.
It's easy, isn't it?
Yeah. And the debt, especially on younger families, is pretty high. It drops lower and lower as people are older in our economy. Maybe because they're used to balancing the budget a little bit. But the debt is pretty high. In fact, I heard one of the presidential candidates, and I won't say who, one of the presidential candidates running for office said, well, these are just figures. They're just figures on paper. We don't worry about how much we spend. And
Wow.
I thought, wow, how many people think that way?
Yeah.
How big is the debt that we have in our country right now? I guess the last I read, it's 33,106 billion.
It's hard to imagine that number.
Oh, yes.
Wow. That we owe somebody else.
Yeah, people can't imagine how much $1 trillion is.
Mm-hmm.
I took my gauge, micrometer, and measured the thickness of a bill,
Mm-hmm.
and it's approximately the same thickness as notebook paper,
Okay.
And I calculated how much, if you stacked up $1 bills, how much would that be? And it came to enough to go around the Earth at the equator 2.5 times for $1 trillion.
Wow.
If you stacked it tightly. It's a lot of money.
That's a lot.
But we'll talk a little bit more about that tremendous debt we have.
So even from a government perspective, I think there's some stats here on how much money that the federal government spends as well. Would you like to hear that?
Yeah.
So there's a quote here that says that the U.S. federal government spent $6.27 trillion last year alone.
Yeah. And that's 25% of the gross national product. In other words,
Yeah.
all of the money that is earned in the United States and changes hands, 1/4 of it, that amount is spent by the federal government. That's a lot.
And when we're talking about the total or the gross domestic product, that's all the sale of goods and services in this country. And 1/4 of it is equivalent to what the government spends.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's a lot of money.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a figure here. It says that in 2024, it is projected that just the interest we have to pay on the borrowed money will be $745 billion. Pretty soon we're going to be at $1 trillion just in the interest we have to pay on the borrowed money. So but that's next year, 2024, estimated $745 billion in interest.
It'd be interesting to take a poll of the average person on the street just to ask the question, how much does the U.S. government owe in debt?
Mm-hmm.
I think most people wouldn't have a clue or couldn't even get close to the number.
Yeah, I must say that most of the money that they borrow, see, if you overspend, it goes way beyond the budget that we have, way beyond what's coming in taxes. And if you're overspending, then you have to borrow. And who is the government borrowing from? Well, it borrows from the people. They sell bonds and so forth, and that pays for the money that they overspend every year. However, it tells you that the American dollar isn't worth anything if we don't have confidence in the American government.
Correct.
So they're borrowing with confidence that the United States government is a secure agency that's going to pay them back with interest.
Mm-hmm.
If we lose confidence in the dollar, or we lose confidence in the government, then our money isn't worth anything.
And there have been some recent trends to devalue by other countries the dollar, as the standard in the world. And we're seeing some of that happening right in front of us. And so that you talk about what is the dollar, how is it valued, who is behind it. Those are things that are happening in the world that we really don't have a lot of control over. So that really concerns me.
Yeah, like how does the government pay off all this money that it has borrowed? That'd be the next question I think you was probably in your mind. How does the government pay all that off? Well, you have to remember that the government, when the American dollar is not strong and other currencies around the world are stronger, in other words, they can buy dollars cheaper, then they can buy American goods easier. They buy more American goods. So sometimes our politicians say, if we can devalue the dollar, then we can sell more goods and everybody will be better off. It doesn't always work. Or some might say, if we could inflate the money so it's not worth very much, and we can spend the money now and then we'll inflate it, and we can pay back with inflated money that's not worth much, and look what we can gain. So there are a lot of thoughts going on in people's minds, and one of them was open the borders. Yeah, I don't know if people have thought about that, but I have read that where they say if we can open the American border and let people in, that people coming in start businesses at twice the rate that people here in this country do. And they'll start these new businesses and there'll be more taxes and that'll help the economy. However, you have to realize that a lot of these people that are coming across poor can't start much of a business.
I was just going to say, where does the money come from for the startup cost to start the business?
Yeah, we'd have to loan them the money from the government because banks aren't going to want to take that risk. And it's interesting that they say, oh yeah, they'll be paying taxes, they'll start new businesses and they'll be paying taxes. But when you consider the national taxes in the United States, the lower 50% of taxpayers pay only like 2.6% of the taxes in the country.
Yeah.
The upper 50% pay like 97 point some percent of the taxes. So these people wouldn't be up there, in a high income bracket enough to be paying a lot of taxes. And if they're in the underground economy, it's zero. They'll never pay taxes.
That's right.
And a lot of these people under the underground economy, they receive, let's say, $20,000 in cash, and they may receive like $10,000 from a business that's going to report it. That looks like they only got $10,000 that year, therefore they can collect from the government and get on welfare. You see.
Well, and then, I don't want to get too far off, but there's all of the support services that have to be in place, right? Healthcare, food stamps, other programs that are the safety nets, that are meant to be the safety nets. So, let's just talk a little bit about healthcare. If you have an accident and you're an immigrant into the country, the hospital, the ER has to take the patient. So the question is, who pays for those services?
Yeah, and so these people coming in, that they're expecting to increase their the buying also. They say they'll buy more if they come into the country, and that increases the economy. But you have to realize also that the average student in school is costing us almost $15,000 a year per student. Wow. And the average number of kids is 3.8 on these people coming across the border. So they're going to have basically 4 students in school at $15,000 apiece. There's no way that they're going to be able to pay that in income tax or to pay that difference, and the health care. So sometimes what the government tries to do is not working very well and running up the debt. Now, another way they've thought about paying off the debt is having a sales tax,
Okay.
which is probably a little more fair than some of the taxes, because everybody does buy. And
This would be a national sales tax.
national sales
in
tax.
addition to state sales tax?
Right.
Yeah.
In Japan, it's 10%. And there are those trying to push Japan up to 20%. Some of the people that are controlling finances in the world say you need to go up to 20% tax as a national tax.
I think I've heard this being stated as a consumption tax. A sales tax is a consumption tax.
Yeah.
In other words, the more you buy, the more, or you have to pay the tax rate on the goods and services.
Yeah, it's the International Monetary Fund that's advising Japan they should go to 20% tax. So that's to solve their debt problem.
So what's another way?
Well, we did mention that taxes are one way to handle that. I did take down some data from the IRS that says that the top 1% of the people in this country who they say are not paying their fair share are paying 42.3% of our income taxes.
It's a big
The
number.
top 1% is paying 42.3% of the taxes. And we already mentioned the top 50% are paying 97.7%. Some other world economies like the Ivory Coast, they take 60% of everybody's paycheck. So the country gets deep in debt. How is it going to affect us? Denmark, they take 50%. I think we mentioned that a little bit last time.
Yeah, we did.
They take 50%, and there's 25% sales tax. And if you bought a car for $33,000, we said that there's a $50,000 tax on that $33,000 car. And so some of these countries like that are heavy into taxes. So the more social programs you have to solve the issues, the more the taxes are. Netherlands, it's 37 to 50% tax.
So if I may be so bold, this sounds very socialistic, almost communistic, because how does that affect the productivity of the individual? As a business person, if you know that more and more of your paycheck or your dollar is being kept by the government, my question is, how productive are you going to be?
Yeah. They did have some problems with this in some countries. China, with the food issue, they were saying you can just keep this much and the rest goes to the cities. Russia did the same thing. China had up to 45 million people starve because they quit producing as much as they needed. If I can only keep this much,
right,
then that's all I'll produce. I will just produce that much. Yeah. Russia, the same thing happened, and they lost a total of like 10 million people back in 1921, right in that era.
Wow.
So
I have another question for you, Alan. So along these same lines, what can the government legally take from you?
Yeah, they are empowered to take money from you if you owe the government. And people have found out that if they don't pay their taxes or they owe the government money, they can take your motorized vehicles. That can be a motorcycle, car, boat, you name it. Mm-hmm. They can confiscate those things. They can take your cash in a bank account. They can take financial assets and other accounts, maybe even something you inherit. They can take that. They can take technological devices, including computers, mobile phones. They controlled substances. And any drug paraphernalia, we know they break into houses and take that stuff all the time. That's legal,
Sure.
they can take that. They can take real estate, and they can take weapons. We see that every day. They come in and they say, hey, they had weapons, and they take the weapons. So yeah, the government does have power to come in and take what they feel is needed to take. Whether it's just trying to solve crime problems or you owe them money, these are things that they can legally take from people.
And it really doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the politics of the government. That has, the government doesn't care, right?
No.
Because if there's money owed, they will resort to all those measures you just talked about.
Yeah, and that brings us back to this idea that can we buy or sell? Could they limit our buying or selling? Yeah, if they take all your funds and they have the ability to do that, all that has to be said is these people are lawless and we should take what they have. It's a way of controlling or punishing.
So there's one thing that we haven't talked about and they haven't brought up yet, but there is a brand new program that the federal government is implementing right now, and it's called FedNow. And FedNow is, I'm not sure you've heard about this, but it's a government clearinghouse for transactions. So today we use credit cards and PayPal and, to do electronic commerce, but through the FedNow programs, which it's voluntary at this point in time, but soon it could become mandatory where all transactions, all commerce could go through the FedNow system. And the question that I think about is that means monitoring and eventually control.
Yeah.
Because it controls the money supply that is ebbing and flowing throughout the economy. And it's a very interesting topic to look at. You talk about, control through that system. If the government is processing all the electronic transactions, rather than a private institution like a bank or a credit card company. We just talked about seizing for debts that's owed to the federal government.
Yeah.
It becomes a lot easier.
Could they take your home?
Well, that's a great question. By the way, what happens, we talked about federal tax, but what about property tax?
Yeah.
Property tax is to the local county, at least in America here.
It's kind of interesting. Back in, we talked about the Depression at that time. People that owed money to the bank for their home, they had a mortgage.
Yeah.
The bank says, well, just stay in there. We can't do anything right now. Things will get better. Just stay in there and we'll take care of the property tax, because, they didn't want to lose the house either, because they had so much money in the house. The bank did.
Yeah.
So they were able to hold on to their homes, but the people who owned their homes outright and didn't owe anybody, their homes were taken and sold at auction to pay the taxes. And the government does have that ability to take your home and auction it off to pay taxes if you don't have a mortgage, let's say. Interesting.
That's, I think about individuals that are maybe in retirement, older, and let's say, yeah, I have worked to this place where I don't owe anything on my home. I own it, but can't pay the property tax. And the government would actually come in and say, we're going to force the sale of the property to pay the debt.
So the government, federal government and local governments have more power over our finances than we really realized. Yes, next question. What do you have?
So this is kind of, ever evolving here. How dependent are we on the government overall?
And how many people get government assistance?
Yeah.
Now, if you're getting government assistance and you're depending on that to live,
Right.
then the government has total control over your life.
So
And
my question is that on purpose?
that is a good question. It's getting to be more and more. I know that. There's an estimated 59 million Americans that receive welfare. And so there are 330 some million Americans, and 59 million, almost 60 million are in welfare programs. That's 19% of the population.
You know, on that topic, I'll just kind of comment. I believe that people, through no fault of their own, sometimes wind up in situations where they need a helping hand. And I think as a Christian, we need to be cognizant of that and to know how to help privately, to help our fellow brother or sister out.
Right.
And
It's true.
And I think that what was put in place as a welfare system, as the, you know, a catching mechanism to help out when no one else would help out, even the private side, has now kind of morphed into something that is, you go here, apply, and this can supplement your income, or be in place in lieu of an income or a job. And I think that's the challenge, right, politically.
Yeah, there have been some people that said, I make more money from the government than I would if I worked at minimum wage, so why work?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a problem today.
So you have some more stats here.
Yeah, I did some research here. The Lexington law firm has said that there are 70 million people on the Social Security Administration welfare programs in the United States. 70 million. That's getting big. That's a large portion of our government budget.
That's over a quarter, isn't it, of the population?
It's large. They also say that the government spent in 2022 over 1.6 trillion on welfare programs. And in 2023, it's expected they will spend 147 billion on nutritional assistance, and including 28 billion on child nutrition programs. At school, summer, you know, we used to had a church, you know, and they'd come in, and in the summertime they would get free meals, even though school wasn't going on. And then in 2023, around 111 billion is budgeted for a nutrition source. Housing assistance, 81 billion. You see the numbers are up there. In 2023, they're spending 25 billion on unemployment programs. By the way, unemployment, I had a friend in the unemployment office, and he says, we are not allowed to ask whether they're citizens or not when they get unemployment. And in 2023, the federal government is projected to spend 536 billion on Medicaid. Medicaid is quickly becoming a national health care system.
Yeah. So I have one other stat that I know of personally, since my business actually deals with providing internet service to individuals and businesses. So what happened just after COVID is a subsidy that the federal, you can apply for, and if you qualify, you can get a $30 a month reduction in your internet bill. And in some cases, that is actually being increased to actually pay for internet services, which a lot of people look at that as a right. They expect it. And so my question is with not only the internet, but with all these programs, is the perception that it's a right of being a U.S. citizen, and shouldn't the federal government pay for that?
Yeah, yeah.
That is a very slippery slope.
I didn't used to see it on the federal budget, but now I'm seeing the internet is a large part of the federal budget, something like 11% or something. It's quite large.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly political, because they realize that a lot of people, when it comes election time, are getting their information off the internet, not off of the television.
Right.
So they're trying to put internet in the hands of everybody so that they can get the votes.
And pushing people, I think, overall to a digital economy.
Yeah.
And how we started, talking about control of not being able to buy or sell.
Yeah.
I believe that is the more citizens you can push into the digital economy to regulate and ultimately control those transactions. I think that's what this is about. So I have some more questions.
Yeah, go on.
So do we try to control people with money in our personal life?
People, I have some stats here from Good Housekeeping.
Okay.
What is considered spousal abuse? When your spouse withholds financial information from you. Your partner discourages you from having a job. Your partner limits your spending. That's spousal abuse. Your partner gets very heated about money. Your partner forces you to bail them out. They go into jail. Taking money by fraud in the family, that is a big problem. That is bad. A spouse asks you to prove what you spent your money on. That's spousal abuse. Or controls what you can and can't spend your money on. So, yeah, that is getting to be a big issue in what is spousal abuse and what is not spousal abuse with money.
Maybe just a side comment. I do see a lot of people that get married or have been living together that are running separate bank accounts rather than one bank account.
Yeah.
And I think that is challenging on multiple levels, because it's what God has ordained to be the marriage between a man and a woman. Now you are wanting to keep the finances separate in case something happens. And so my question is, are we trusting God to put him first in our lives and in our finances when we are, having separate bank accounts?
Definitely, they don't trust each other. We wonder why we have so many divorces.
Right, but that's another problem. Okay, so did you have anything else on that subject?
No, I think you.
Okay.
There was one thing here we could say. Some of the states are controlling businesses coming into the state. They ask them political questions. I saw this on the news. And if they didn't answer the political questions correctly, they couldn't get support from the state. And so we're seeing more of that. Banks, there was one case where a bank was accused of pulling their funds and closing out their accounts because they were a religious institution and they didn't like their standing in politics. They were conservative and the bank was not, and so they kind of shut them down. And I think that's kind of interesting what's going on with institutions that used to didn't care about your standing in politics. Now they're starting to put pressure on people.
Well, I think if we go back to Revelation, to what the Bible says here about this control of not being able to buy or sell. But I also want to put it in context too. We were talking about this a little bit before we started. if we couldn't in our daily lives, and if you take, a typical day and what you do as far as depending on the store. I'm not talking about a physical store, I'm talking about, filling your gas tank to be able to have the freedom to drive where you want to drive. To be able to go and buy groceries for your family. To be able to buy, building materials or anything that could be cut off. How will we be able to survive? We're not talking about a case of if this is going to happen. This is a case of, and we're told through the Bible that it will happen.
Yes.
So let's go back to that verse in Revelation 13:16 and repeat it once again. Would you?
I'll read it. It says, He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
So we could spend a lot of time to talk about the mark.
Yeah.
But what do you think the short answer is behind the mark?
Well, I don't believe it's a literal mark, a stamp on the forehead, and
right.
that's what the Greek word means, is a stamp. But I think it's symbolic of the fact that either with our mind we are in agreement with this beast power, or the hand, we're not able to work. And so either we have to come to an agreement or we're not able to work. So it's using the mind or the hand here. I think that's what it's talking about. And so pressure will be put on Christians. The question is, who's this beast? That takes a little bit to get into, but we might say that the beast in Revelation 13 is talking about a power that is worshipped. So it has something to do with worship. It has something that is supported by Satan, because it says this great red dragon gives him his power and authority. It says that. You can read these in Revelation 13. 12 is good to read too, because it talks about the beginning of this red dragon that is Satan. His tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. Yeah. Verse 9 says it's Satan. He's cast out of heaven with his angels. And then it acquaints this dragon with the beast power. In fact, if you look at that beast in Revelations 17, it's the same description. It's red. It has the 10 horns and 7 heads. The same thing. And it says that a woman is riding on this beast. A woman in Revelation is the church. And we know that from Revelation 19. You're the same author, same book, and it says that the bride of Christ, there's a wedding feast in Revelation 19, around verse 10 in there. And so it talks about the bride of Christ as the church. And so the true church would be the bride, and the false church would be the other one, the harlot.
So I think we should read these verses here in Revelation 13. And if you don't mind, I have it right in front of me here, starting with verse 1. It says, Then I stood on the sand of the sea and saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Verse 3, it says, And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of the life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. You mentioned worship, and my mind immediately goes to the temptation of Jesus in the desert. When Satan, and what did he say to Jesus?
Mm-hmm. If you bow down and worship me.
It's fascinating that it comes down to worship and who we worship, especially in regards to this text here in Revelation.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that at the end of Revelation 12, it identifies the people that this dragon is trying to persecute. And he goes after this woman, and it says, here is the patience of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and have what? A spirit of prophecy. Mm-hmm. And in Revelation 19, he says the spirit of prophecy is, no, did I get that wrong? It is the who keep the Ten Commandments,
yeah,
and the faith of Jesus.
Here are the patience of the saints.
That's Revelation 14. Here's the patience of the saints, those who keep the Ten Commandments and have the faith of Jesus. So the Ten Commandments are tied into this group of people that the devil is trying to persecute. And we see that in the Dark Ages, there was a lot of persecution. And the Protestant Reformation came out of that. And they said that what's going on here, those who are doing the persecuting, the religious persecution, are, in essence, this beast that is trying to do away with God's true people who keep the commandments. That came out of the Reformation, and I think they were right.
So there's two verses that I think we should probably go back to 1 Timothy 6:10.
We better stop with that one.
Okay. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
Yeah, love of money.
Love of money.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So my closing question, I guess, is based on, should we be fearful of this time that is talked about here in Revelation 13, and how should we live our lives to prepare for this?
Yeah, we have to depend on God rather than our pocketbook. And just too often we just depend on our money. And I'm not worried when I get old because the government will take care of me, and I have money, so I'm okay. But we don't depend on God. Yeah. That is the problem.
And praying for that divine wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and sign off. And we thank everybody for listening to the State of Our World. And you can find us get on the internet and look up Stateline Advent Media. And from there, look on to videos and YouTube videos, and you'll find other programs that we have. We've been discussing some of these topics. So thank you, and have a good day.